Hello, Beat Check listeners. I'm Gosia Wozniacka, and I'm the environmental justice reporter at The Oregonian. Today, I'm with Linda Perrine, a project manager with the Oregon Coalition for an Environmental Rights Amendment. And we're going to talk about efforts to add an environmental rights amendment to Oregon's state constitution, either through a legislative referral in next year's session or through a ballot initiative. We're going to talk about what such an amendment would do in our state and why it's needed. So let's get started. Welcome to the show, Linda. Thanks for taking the time to speak with me.
Thank you, Gosia. I'm really excited to be here and to tell your listeners about what we're up to.
Yeah. So first of all, what is an environmental rights amendment? I think that might be something many people have not heard about yet.
Well, many people think that our existing Bill of Rights and constitutions, both at the state level and the federal level, should guarantee us a right to a healthy environment, and yet it isn't explicitly called out. There are 3 states that do call it out, and we'll get to that a little bit later, but the majority of the constitutions in the United States do not make that a explicit right. And so we're working on adding it as a amendment to the Oregon Constitution in the Bill of Rights section and make it a fundamental right, because those are fundamental rights are considered essential to life and liberty, and they have to be protected from political interference.
I think many people would be surprised that environmental rights are not guaranteed as a fundamental right in our state constitution.
Well, under the clause of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, most of us would want to believe that life entails all of the essential ingredients of life, and yet we're finding out in lawsuits and court decisions and things like that the courts may interpret that differently. So 3 states have taken it upon themselves over the years, Montana, Pennsylvania, and New York recently, to add a explicit environmental right to their amendments that calls out the right to clean air, clean water, stable climates, and so on. Or in New York's case, they just made a single sentence amendment that said the right to a healthy environment.
Interesting. So, I mean, beyond nice words, and, of course, we all do have the right to clean air and clean water. What is the purpose of the amendment? What is the purpose of adding those words into our Constitution? Why do we need it?
Right. So the issue of giving the public officials, our state government, our state legislators, our courts, a more explicit means of ensuring that the state is going to protect the environment. Now, we have a public trust doctrine in Oregon, and it is the state officials, up to the governor's job to presumably protect all forms of natural resources for the sake of protecting our lives and our health. And yet, if it isn't spelled out in more detail, it seems that it is not being found in the favor of the people's rights to this, to be able to have clean air, clean water, and so on. And so we're giving public officials better tools to protect the state's environment. And they sometimes have to make compromises when they're making decisions on various environmental concerns relative to industry's needs. There are cases that we can cite all over the state where the environment is, not as given the highest priority that it should in order to protect our essential needs for health. So we're trying to make this, it will actually be a tool in the favor of state government officials to be able to cite this amendment if it passes, and therefore make more tighter laws, stand up for, the environmental impacts when new permits are being proposed through any form around the state, and make those rules stick as something that the state is obligated to protect.
So you mentioned 3 states have this on their books currently: Montana, Pennsylvania, and New York. Has it made a difference in those states, and how?
Well, In Pennsylvania, they were successful at suing the state over pollution to a river, the Delaware River, and it actually led to writing this into their constitution as a form of making this a permanent protection for their essential needs for health. In Montana, I don't know if you're familiar with the recent court case that
Yes,
happened there, but
absolutely.
in August of 2023, our very own Oregon-based Our Children's Right, which is a nonprofit pursuing youth plaintiff lawsuits in all 50 states to step up and say protecting younger generations' future and their health has to be a priority for the state courts, the state government, and so on. So the youth took the state of Montana to court, and the lower court judge said, yes, indeed, you have explicit rights in the Constitution, and they're being violated by the state's fairly vigorous pursuit of fossil fuel interests. So natural gas fracking to coal mining to, more industrial activity. And she sided in the favor of the plaintiffs, which was a groundbreaking case that had not been decided within the United States prior to that.
I should also add that we do have a similar youth climate lawsuit in Oregon that's been dragging through the court system here, and it hasn't been as successful thus far as in Montana. So it does sound like that environmental rights mention in Montana's constitution has made a difference in the case of this lawsuit.
Yeah, and actually Our Children's Trust was behind the lawsuit here in Oregon as well.
Exactly.
And they've learned through that process of bringing it up through the courts what were the specific legal, language that was required that the Oregon Constitution didn't have. So we are very fortunate to have Our Children's Trust partnering with us on this language development for the Oregon amendment that we're working on. And they're going to bring their 50-state perspective, their wealth of knowledge on the variety of constitutions, the variety of laws, and the language that the courts need in order to make the courts side with the people for the right to a healthy environment.
Now, there's still a little bit of a debate of, these climate lawsuits, which the children's youth climate lawsuits are sort of one variety. There's other climate lawsuits, how successful they will be in actually leading to any specific actions or changes. But, clearly these environmental right amendments could, help people pursue these climate lawsuits. Could, you mentioned this Pennsylvania pollution case that's also a lawsuit, but a little more specific. And I'm wondering if, could these environmental rights amendments actually change how the state manages its natural resources, whether air, water, forests, oceans? Could it change how our state responds to contamination, pollution issues, ocean sea level rise, declines in underwater kelp forests off the Oregon coast? I mean, myriad things that are happening as a result of, climate change and global warming and heat waves. Could this environmental amendment be something that actually pushes the state towards, sort of stricter management of our natural resources?
I think it will. In some cases, it will be for the sake of avoiding a lawsuit. In other cases, it's going to be, we have legislators that are supportive of this idea. And it's not a new idea. Senator Jeff Golden out of Ashland initiated a environmental rights amendment back in 2019 and 2021 sessions of the legislature. But what was lacking was the coalition of people around the state to help get this message across and do the education and the outreach and getting the support to support it in the legislature. So that's what we're doing this time. But yeah, I mean, the ability of the state to point at an amendment like this and say the state is now obligated to do these things. So when it comes to the climate protection program, for instance, that the state's now rewriting from being tossed out by the Oregon courts, they will now have an obligation to do this work as opposed to something that is run through the political mill and trying to determine whether there is enough votes or enough, who is in the governor's office and directing the various programs for the agencies and things like that, the priorities. So, it takes it out of politics in a big way if we can all agree as residents of Oregon that we want the right to a healthy environment. Then it's up to the state and the courts and the governor to make sure that that's being followed as required by law.
Thank you. You mentioned a coalition that's behind this effort in Oregon, legislators, Our Children's Trust. Can you tell us a little bit more about who is behind this effort, who's part of the coalition, and how did this all get started?
Sure. So I was working on organizing what is now titled OSERA, which is an Oregon Coalition for an Environmental Rights Amendment. And we have a website we'll get to later on. But and unbeknownst to us, there was a second effort going on out of Baker City, Oregon, with the faith-based communities wanting to pursue a ballot initiative for a similar idea for an environmental rights amendment. And they were working with Our Children's Trust. And then we learned of each other's efforts and we started talking together about we should work together and bring the whole gamut of viewpoints around Oregon, which is, so we are somewhat staffed by people out in rural Eastern Oregon, and we're somewhat staffed by people in, the Willamette Valley cities of the west side of Oregon. And we're working on really, truly bringing in people and organizations and groups from around the state. And when we held our May 4th event in Salem, which was sort of our kickoff organizing event, we had 3 state legislators, Senator Jeff Golden, who got up and immediately said, I want to be one of the sponsors that walks this forward in the 2025 session. And he was followed by Senator Manning, James Manning from Eugene area. And he also is interested in co-sponsoring this. And then Representative Mark Gamba from the Milwaukee area is also interested in being a sponsor. So we have already significant interest in the legislature to bring this forward as a legislative referred ballot initiative. And we're going to be working here in the next several months and going into September, where the legislature holds legislative days, sessions in the latter part of September, where we hope to get in there and give some presentations and bring our lobbying group in to talk with legislators about what this is. We should have the language complete at that point. Our schedule for finishing the amendment language is really the end of August, early September. And then we will be bringing that to legislators and trying to educate them about it, as well as explain the benefits and the, how much support there is around the state for something like this.
Thank you. So the effort to pass this type of environmental rights amendment is happening not just in Oregon currently, but in a dozen states around the country. Mm-hmm. And as I understand, there's a national group or nonprofit that's working with local groups to pass these amendments. Can you tell us more about this group and why it's interested in these amendments nationwide?
Sure. We have Maya Van Rossum is the woman who organized this organization called forthegenerations.org is their website if you want to check them out. And she is advocating in all 50 states for all of the states to get behind creating their own state constitutional amendments. there so far is different approaches, and certainly there's different constitutions around the country. So they somewhat have to be custom done for how the Constitution is written, and things like strict scrutiny and all these legal terms and elements that are somewhat different in each state are things that every state is working on to figure out what is the appropriate language they want to use. And it's a very challenging thing to write an amendment that the people are going to understand the implications of, and yet is legally language strong enough that the courts are required to implement it. And so that's why we're taking these months. We've been working on this already since January, but we're hoping to finish by the end of August to have language that is slightly custom to Oregon, but also meets all of the lessons learned from our children's trust in their lawsuit pursuits. Maya Van Rossum is also attending our meetings and contributing her thoughts and ideas to this as well. And she agrees that the states really have to be the final arbiter of what the words in their amendment is, based on the unique aspects of the law and the Constitution in that state. But yes, and just to give the listeners a sense of who else is working on this, currently green amendments are in the legislatures of Arizona, California, Connecticut, Delaware, Florida, Hawaii, Iowa, Maine, New Jersey, New Mexico, Texas, Vermont, Washington, and West Virginia.
Oh.
So Oregon is about to become one of those states as soon as we introduce this into the legislature. And I'm really proud to be a part of it.
What's your background? How did you get into this effort?
I have, I could tell you my story of how I ended up, I'd say, to where I am, but I started my professional working career at NASA in Houston on the Space Shuttle program in the Mission Control Center. And I was trained and certified at the Life Support Console, and then moved up to the front room ECOM console that many folks that track NASA are familiar with. And, I'd spend my nights, the sleep shifts of the crew, they'd put the picture of the planet up, and you'd sit there in a kind of mesmerized state watching this beautiful blue planet float by while you're monitoring the crew's data and doing the job. And the crew would get up every morning, and inevitably one of them would say, we have to do more to protect our planet. And then, we'd bring them back, and NASA would go on with its business as it does. And, that message of trying to protect the planet is somewhat lost in the work of everyday life that we're all doing. It isn't just them. It's we all are busy with jobs and an economy we have to interface with in some manner. And so I thought it was ironic that here I am being certified as somebody monitoring the life support systems of the space shuttle, and yet we would get astronauts back, or in daily life here, we would never refer to our life support systems here on Earth. We think of it as economic reasons. We think of it as jobs. We think of it as many things that are abstractions and things we draw from the environment. But the environment is really the high-level support structure that gives us the ability to be on this Earth. And so we are, we've done amazing things as a human species. There's no question about that. But I think we've gotten some collective amnesia about where our ability to be and live comes from. And that's the reason we're going to go make it explicit in a constitution.
It's kind of a reminder. It puts it front and center. Yeah, even if we forget in our daily lives. It seems like a no-brainer to have this in the Constitution. We all should have a guaranteed clean water, air, soil, clean environment to live in. And we should take care of it, obviously. But there are people who are challenging these environmental rights amendments. This type of amendment would likely lead to more litigation. and perhaps stricter management, as we talked about. And so, industry is not pretty happy with these. But there's also pushback from an unlikely place, which is the green energy sector. And some folks in the green energy sector are arguing that these amendments could make it more difficult to site green energy projects or mines for minerals such as lithium. Because these projects, while they are pursuing green energy and have positive impacts, also do negatively impact our environment, our soil, our air. They lead to pollution and other issues. And so I'm wondering if this is something that your coalition here in Oregon has thought about, and how this amendment would sort of correspond with the state's own, efforts and the efforts of private developers around the state to pursue green energy, to site green energy projects, whether in the ocean or out in the Columbia River Gorge or, across Eastern Oregon, be it solar or wind energy or, mines on the Oregon-Nevada border, et cetera, et cetera. There's going to be a lot more of these projects coming in the future. And so how did these projects sort of square with this guarantee to a clean environment?
Well, that is the crux of the issue, isn't it? Because while we all want to have all these healthy things that we need to live, we also place demands on the planet at the same time, each and every one of us. In the subject of mining, let's start there in particular. Mining has certainly a large impact, but one of the things that has been a byproduct of mining is letting wastewater that is inevitable in mining go out into our waterways, whether that's the creek nearby or maybe it's even a dry out in the desert. If you're talking Nevada and eastern, southeast corner of Oregon, a lot of those places are dry most of the year, and then the rainy season hits them, and all of a sudden you've got runoff from places that are contaminated. So I think it is a matter of making industries step up their game, that it isn't to necessarily cancel projects, it is to put boundaries on what they can and cannot do. And polluting waterways, leaving behind, Superfund sites of, contaminated soil to the point that it's left for the government to clean up and the taxpayers and so on. It's going to require our state to, in order to approve a project that has that kind of impact, they're going to have to put boundaries on what industry is going to have to meet to be able to do the project. And if they cannot, for whatever reason, meet those requirements, those guidelines, then yes, there may be some decisions that have to be made about whether that project goes forward, or send them back to their own planning session and figure out, can we do things differently here? Can we do things in a different manner that is bringing it up to the level of keeping the air clean, keeping the water clean, and so on. Because of our lax laws over all this time, we have power plants that pollute our air. We have put that as the priority, that industry and economic growth and all these things are the priority. And then we, are very sad when the environment becomes the secondary priority. So it's a matter of bringing those two priorities up to an equal footing and stating that industry cannot do these things at the expense of the environment. They're going to have to plan their projects according to keeping the air, the water, the climate, and so on stable. And that seems like a basic expectation, but it isn't going to happen until there are means to force that through legal action.
Any other of the green industries? I know you mentioned mining. Any other ones that stand out to you that sort of might be impacted by this, where you feel like they kind of also need to maybe step up or change their practices?
Well, I have to say the U.S. is doing significant progress on power plants, where a huge chunk of pollution comes from coal-fired power plants, natural gas power plants. The renewable energy industry is coming on at a fairly rapid pace. They're addressing the grid challenges we hear about in the news that, we don't necessarily have a grid that's able to accommodate the ramp up of all this renewable energy, but I think that problem is going to get solved here very quickly too, because we have to do this. This is not an optional future at this point. We're either going to make these changes or we're going to create a planet that's unlivable. And so I would hope that we all want that. And yes, it's a transition from how we've been doing business to a new way of doing business that is much more mindful of the impact that it's having on the planet.
Thank you, Linda. I really appreciate your time. This has been a super important conversation, and we'll be following this in the future as you develop your coalition at the Oregonian and OregonLife.com. And I'll drop a few of the links that you mentioned in the show notes in the post online. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening to Beat Check with the Oregonian. If you like this show, please give us a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Help spread the word. The best way to support our journalism and stories like this one is with a subscription to Oregon Live. You can do that at OregonLife.com/pod support. Until next time.